Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to be working on this model that I need for a chroma key background, and I'll use it as it's a good opportunity to show you how I do my molds to get the textures, bricks, rocks and any other texture that I need for models. This model here is on a scale of 1 to 10, but these molds can also be used for the smaller models of 1 to 100 or whatever scale you need. So let's get started. Right, the first thing that we're going to need to do is make the original texture that we're going to be molding. I like to use plasticine, which is just your common everyday plasticine. So I get some bit of rock or anything with a texture. In this case it's a piece of drywall, and texturize it, and then I'm going to cut it to more or less the shape of the rocky bricks that I want. I'm going to put it onto another board where I've got a whole bunch of others like this. Stick it there. Now you'll notice I've made a border of little sticks that's going to cover the entire bricks. In this case, done. I take silicon, which is just your normal cold silicon gun, which is quite cheap. Then I'm going to be squirting it on, getting it right down the grooves, and working the silicon into every crevice that we can. Now, some people may be a little bit allergic to the stuff. My skin's pretty tough, so you may want to use like rubber gloves or something to do this. But you need to spread it there. I just use my fingers, but it's good to use some gloves so you don't have any allergic problems. And you don't want to spread it much thicker than a bead of silicon 4 or 5 millimeters, or like 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick, because it takes too long to set. And I get a blade, like a hacksaw blade, and just level it off. And then I get a piece of curtain material, bridesmaid's veil, anything that you've got available, and put that on top just to add a bit of extra strength to it. And then do the same. Spreading it over to embed it in, and that gives your mold, if it's very thin, gives it some extra strength for when you're taking your bricks out of your mold. One last pass just to level it all off nicely. Now that's basically, you let it set for probably at least a few hours. If it's very thick like this, in this case it's about 3 or 4 millimeters thick, I'd probably leave it overnight, go do something else, and then come back in the morning and see how it looks. If there's any left over like this, I can take it and spread it thinly on top of something else, and then I'll take a little piece of cloth and just place it on top, so that I'm going to now have a strengthened piece of mold. So that's more or less setting up my mold, and the next step, once it's dried tomorrow, I'll show you the next step. I have another mold made. In this case it doesn't have that cloth, and you can see that it tends to tear if you're a little bit rough on it sometimes, so that's why it's good to put that material. And that's my mold. And I also have another one I've made for corner bricks. I did the same process with all the sticks and things, but I went around the edge of a piece of wood so that they're now in an angle. Another example is making roofing tiles, nice and small as you can see. I then took a mold of that using the silicon, and then you can cast the actual tiling to then produce your little house roofs that way. I'm going to be using for this particular model a mixture of plaster of Paris, because it's nice and cheap, But sometimes when I have very fine models and I need something that's a little bit stronger like these corner ones, I use car body filler, which I'll show you about in another tutorial. What I'm going to use now is to give extra strength to that, because they're quite thin. I'm going to use not only water to fix it, but I'm going to put about 20% or a quarter of Elmer's white glue in it, into the water, to help make it a bit stronger. And then with the plaster of Paris, mix it in there, and once it's reasonably smooth, I'm going to plop it onto there and then spread it to the very edges. This is a little bit lumpy, I'm not sure why, but usually it should be nice and creamy thin. And then I put it onto a piece of board, and you just I'm going to tap it around a little bit so that any bubbles come out, and it tends to go nice and flat, so that when the bricks come out, they'll have a nice flat back to them. I'm going to set that aside probably for overnight as well, and that's why it's good to have several molds, and that's why I'm making another one. If you have several, you can have several molds going on at the same time, and you can speed up your work that way. And also, whatever's left over, I can do my edge bricks. Spatula them in as well. Once again, it would be nice to have several of these molds going at once so that I can get the corners ones nicely done. And spatula it off and set that aside to set. So here we are the following day. Our molds are now set. If you've used a nice shiny backed piece of timber, it will peel off the wood okay. And you'll see we now have our mold. And so there's the finished mold that we can then fill with material like we did before, scrape it off, and we should get it just like here. Now we just carefully peel it off, and we will have a whole bunch of bricks that we can now use to stick onto a model. And if they break, don't worry too much. You'll always need somewhere where you're going to need half bricks. And the corner ones, you need to be particularly careful when you peel it that you don't snap those corners. Come from both ends is preferable. Just really so that they eventually pop out as little corner bricks that you can now clean up the edges. So now we can take our individual bricks, and I like to do the individual bricks because then you've always got a lot of variations. Usually you don't get a lot of walls that are totally widespread. You get lots of bends and small bits of wall, and so you can make quite a good looking natural thing. Break up these ones and you can put them on individually, and it also pays to take a little bit of sandpaper and just run it on the sandpaper just to make sure that the back of it is a little bit flatter before using Elmer's white glue or PVA glue. Stick it on there and it will go on quite nicely wherever you're going to put it.